A week had passed since I drove up that gravel lane with a truck bed full of fence panel, and no idea what I was walking into. In that week, we turned a homestead into something closer to a fort. The north line held chain link and double cattle panel from fence post to fence post. The east and west lines, sagging and half run, where I first walked them with Frank, were restrung with new wire and set on posts driven deep enough to hold against more than just a leaning cow. The tree line to the west had its first 30 feet cleared out, low branches gone, sight lines opened enough that nothing could stand there unseen. Randy turned out to have a good head for wiring, and he and Frank spent 2 full days up on the roof and out at the fence corners, running an antenna higher than anyone in the county had put up for him, trying to pull into the radio more than just static. For a few days it worked. We had 2 stations, sometimes 3, broadcasting information that got worse by the hour. Quarantine zones collapsing, cities going dark one at a time. Official channels replaced by amateur ones run by whoever still had power and the nerve to talk. Then 4 days in, the stations started dropping, one by one. By the 6th day, we had nothing at all. Carol worked the dial for hours at a stretch on the radio, yet she never found anything more. Tom was up near the north corner, the highest ground on the property, doing what he did most mornings, walking the line, checking splices, keeping an eye on the tree line and the open pasture beyond it. Frank was down by the barn with the cattle, Carol, the garden. Randy was up on the ladder against the house, still fussing with the antenna mount, even though the radio had gone static 2 days before. I heard the first shot before I understood what it was. One flat crack that could have been anything on a property with this many tools and this much open ground. Then a second closer together, with the third than the first 2 have been. And by the 4th shot I was already moving, dropping my tools where I stood. Frank beat me to the north corner. He'd been closer, and he moved fast for a man his age, rifle already up by the time I caught sight of him, crossing the pasture at a dead run. Carol wasn't far behind me, garden hose still in her hand, because it was the nearest thing to a weapon within reach when the shooting started. By the time we all reached the north corner, it was over. Tom stood at the fence line, rifle still raised, looking out past the panel and chain link at 4 bodies sprawled in the grass on the far side. Infected. 2 of them close to the fence, close enough that they'd have reached it inside another 10 seconds if Tom hadn't put them down first. The other 2 were further out. 4 of them, Tom said, voice steady but breathing hard. Came out of the tree line all at once. Didn't look like they were tracking anything in particular. Just walking. Frank looked past the fence line, past the bodies, out toward the direction they came from. The same direction as the Garrison place, 10 miles off, but the only thing out that way worth walking from. Frank stood there for a long moment, rifle lowered now, looking at the empty stretch of pasture, like he could see all the way to Walt's barn if he looked hard enough. Everyone inside, he said finally. Now. We gathered in the kitchen, Frank standing at the head of the table. 4 of them came from that direction, he said. Not driven out, not chasing anything. Tom said they were just walking. That kind of movement out here, this far from anywhere with people in it, tells me something's changed at Walt's place. Either he's dead and whatever got him is spreading out from there, or he's alive and something's pushed a group of them off his land and toward ours. Either way, Carol said. You want to go and find out, don't you? Either way, I need to know, Frank said, looking at the table. We've got no radio, no phone, no idea what's happening past this fence line except what walks up to it. Walt's got a dish and a working line, or he did a week ago. If he's still alive, we check on him and we get whatever news his television's still carrying. If he's not, he has supplies. I think it can help us out. Either way, I want to know. Not alone, Carol said, flat, the same tone Frank used when a thing wasn't up for debate. Frank looked at Tom. You know the place as well as I do. And Tom, he didn't hesitate. I'm with you, Frank. I offered to go instead, or alongside. I worked fence for Walk 2 back before any of this, same as Frank and Tom had. But Frank shook his head. Two's company, three's a coward, Steve. If we need help bringing back things, we'll come for you and Randy. And that was the end of the discussion. Frank and Tom loaded the truck and left within the hour, and the rest of us went back to work. They approached on foot the last quarter mile. Truck left at the end of Walt's Lane. They knew the layout without needing to discuss much of it. The equipment barn, the house behind it, the open ground between the two that gave clear sight lines, but no cover. We stay on the tree line going in, Frank told Tom. Less chance of being seen from the house, better chance of seeing anything before it sees us. And the barn? Tom asked. Check it first. If Walt's okay, he'll be in the barn. If not, we have no idea where. Frank looked at the house. Dark. No movement in any window. If he's not in the barn, we go in the house last, not first. They crossed to the barn without incident. Empty. No Walt, and no infected. An empty barn on a working farm was its own kind of a bad sign, and Frank noticed there were no cattle inside either. But Walt came around the side of the house, at a lurch. What used to be a man's face had gone gray, jaw hanging loose, eyes fixed on the two of them with nothing between them. Frank raised his rifle without a word and put him down with one shot. But Frank didn't get the time to mourn the death of his friend. More came from the far side of the house and the tree line behind the barn, faster than either of them expected, closing ground fast. Frank fired and fired, Tom beside him doing the same. Frank's rifle ran dry, with one of them on him already, inside arm's reach, hands out. There wasn't time to reload. This was how it ended for him, he thought, clear as anything, right there in Walt's yard. He made his peace with what he thought faster than he would expect it to. But Tom put himself between Frank and the thing reaching for him, pulling his knife, doing what Frank's empty rifle couldn't. He killed it, but not before it got a mouthful of his forearm on the way down, teeth closing hard enough to tear through his sleeve and the skin underneath. Frank tore a strip of his own shirt and wrapped the wound tight. Neither of them said much on the walk back to the truck or on the drive home. Frank made a decision somewhere on that drive before it even reached the lane, and he made it alone. He was not going to kill Tom for something that might not happen. Frank got Tom into the house before anyone had a chance to ask much of anything, calling for Carol. Tom was pale, walking on his own but slow, cradling the arm Frank had wrapped. Carol met them in the kitchen and had Tom sat down at the table and with his sleeve cut away within minutes. She worked fast and quiet, cleaning the wound. Her hands went still for half a second, but she got a clear look at it. A bite. Unmistakable, a bite. Randy had been up on the roof again when the truck came in, and by the time he climbed down and came around the side of the house, Frank was already carrying Tom's rifle in from the truck, and Carol was elbow deep in gauze and disinfectant at the kitchen table. Randy stopped at the doorway and looked at Tom's arm. Before Randy could say anything, Frank turned to him. Go get Steve. Carol finished cleaning and dressing the wound, gave Tom something for the pain, and walked him up to his room herself, an arm around him the whole way. She got him settled and came back down within a few minutes, and he was shaky but stable, resting, and the bleeding had stopped clean. By then, Randy had found me at the fence line and told me what little he knew. The two of us walked back to the house together, neither one of us saying much, not until we knew what Frank had to say. We sat around the same kitchen table, Carol, Frank, Randy, and me. And Frank told it plain, start to finish. Walt's death, the fight in the yard, the moment his rifle ran dry, and Tom getting bit, saving him. Nobody spoke for a long moment after he finished. Carol was the first to break the silence, and what she said surprised me some, given it was her own house and her own risk on the line. What are we talking about here, Frank? What are you thinking of doing? Nothing, Carol, Frank said. We aren't doing nothing to Tom. Randy was the next to speak. I don't know Tom, but we all heard the same thing. Everyone's heard it. A bite causes the infection that turns you into a zombie. There's no cure. There's no waiting out. There's no maybe. It happens, and when it does, it's fast, and it doesn't ask permission first. We don't know that for certain, Frank said. Not firsthand. We've heard it the same as you've heard it. I'm not willing to put a bullet in a man who saved my life over something I've only heard secondhand. And what if he turns in the middle of the night? Randy's voice had an edge now, controlled, but not calm, in this house, with all of us asleep. Then we tell Tom we're locking his door, Frank said. But we don't deal with it before it happens. Not to Tom. Randy looked around the table at the three of us, and I watched him understand before anyone said it plain which way this was going. Then let's vote on it, Frank said. I'm not going to make this call for the four of us alone. Not this one. Fine, Randy said. Let's vote. Frank went first. I say we watch him, we treat him, and we don't touch him unless he gives us cause. That's my vote. Same, Carol said, quiet but sure. I agree, I said, but let's keep treating him, but lock his door. Randy sat back in his chair, and for a second I thought he might refuse to answer us at all. I vote we don't wait to find out, he said, like he hadn't already lost the vote. I vote we do it now, while he's calm, while he's still a choice instead of an emergency. I know I'm alone on this. I'm saying it anyway. Frank nodded. 3-1. We watch him, we treat him. Nobody touches Tom unless he gives us cause to. Randy didn't argue further. He just looked at the three of us, one at a time, like we had all gone mad, and then he got up from the table without another word and went outside. Tom didn't turn that night, or the next morning, or through most of the day that came after. Carol dosed him with what antibiotics we had in the house, cleaned and redressed the wound twice. By the second morning, he was sitting up on his own, color back in his face, talking near enough to normal that it got easier, hour by hour. Frank kept working on the property line like nothing had changed. Carol split her time between the garden and Tom's room, checking on him every hour or so, bringing him food. Randy, however, he went quiet, not sullen, but obviously angry. and quiet, doing a share of the work without complaint, but keeping some distance from the rest of us that hadn't been there before. I caught him a few times standing near enough to Tom's window to see it from wherever he was working, like he was watching for something. By the second full day, Tom was asking to come downstairs and eat at the table instead of having his meals carried up to him. Carol thought it was a good sign, and Frank agreed. I didn't think much of it either way. A man tired of eating alone in bed seemed like the most ordinary thing in the world after everything else that had happened that week. It was near lunchtime on the second day when the dogs started barking. Frank was up from the table, rifle already in hand, from where he kept it leaning by the door, and I was right behind him. "Steve, come with me," he said, already moving. "Randy, stay with Carol." We came around the side of the house at a run and saw it, 3 infected, through a gap in the east line where posts had come loose sometime in the last 2 days, close enough to the cattle that the herd had bunched up tight against the far fence, spooked and bawling. Frank didn't slow down. He put 2 of them down clean before we even got close half the distance. Tom had come down from his room on his own, slow but steady, headed to the kitchen table because he was tired, as he said, of eating off a tray in his bed. Carol was at the stove, Randy, the table already, picking at his own plate. Tom made it to as far as the doorway into the kitchen. He looked fine right up until a second before he didn't. No stumble, no warning, no sound. He just stopped walking, and then he wasn't standing anymore, and was down on the floor before Carol even had turned all the way round from the stove. She went to his side and checked. No pulse, no breathing. She started chest compressions right there on the kitchen floor, counting under her breath, calling Randy to help. But Randy didn't move. His hands were shaking on the edge of the table, and he just sat there staring, and she screamed his name that time, not asking anymore. She kept working, alone, compressions and nothing else, until Tom's eyes opened. Frank and I were still out at the east fence, tamping the post back into the ground when we heard Carol scream from the house. We both ran. I don't remember the distance between the fence and the post. I remember starting to run and then being at the door, Frank ahead of me, rifle up. Frank didn't say a word. He crossed the kitchen and got down beside Carol, checking her over with her hands. And she was talking, fast and broken, trying to explain what had happened in an order that made no sense, and none of it was needed to make sense because the facts of it were plain enough laid out on the kitchen floor. Tom hadn't just died. He'd came back. And Randy, the one who sat alone in that vote 3 days before, the one none of us had listened to, had been the one standing close enough and finally moving fast enough to stop it from taking Carol with it. Nobody in that kitchen said anything for a long time. I looked at Tom's body on the floor, still now, fully finished this time. It was Frank B. and Randy who carried Tom out later that afternoon. We took him past the garden to the family plot at the edge of the property, where Frank's grandparents and his old parents were already buried underneath a strand of oak. A handful of worn stones set close together in the shade. Nobody said much over the grave. Frank said a few words about the kind of man Tom had been, steady and reliable, and willing to put himself between danger and somebody else without stopping to think it through first. And although that was true, every word of it, it didn't make his death any easier to take. Randy stood at the edge of the group through it all, jaws set, arms crossed tight against his chest, eyes fixed on Frank the whole time. He didn't say anything, not one word, the whole time we stood there in the falling light. I watched him and understood, without either one of us saying it, that he blamed every one of us for what had just happened. That evening was the quietest the house had been since I arrived a week ago. Carol sat at the radio, working the dial, finding nothing. Frank sat on the porch a long time, not saying much, rifle across his knees, out of habit more than necessity. I noticed that Frank never once thanked Randy. Not a word about what he'd done in the kitchen. I don't know if Frank couldn't find the words or didn't want to, given everything Randy had argued for 3 days before. I only know the silence sat in the house all evening, and Randy sat with it in the kitchen with Carol, watching her work the dial, station after station, of nothing. Frank was up before the rest of us, same as always, and when I came downstairs, Randy was already sitting across from him at the kitchen table, the two of them talking low. I caught the tail end of it, Randy telling Frank he was leaving, Frank arguing against it, the same arguments Randy himself had made 3 days before, the road, the risk, the not knowing what was between here and anywhere else worth going. Randy didn't have much to say back to any of it. He just kept saying the same thing in different words. He couldn't stay. Frank asked him to wait until the rest of us were up, at least, and Randy agreed to that much. Carol came down not long after, and when she heard it, she protested, asking him to think it through, asking him where he thought he'd even go, reminded him, gently, that he'd saved her life. Randy listened to it all without much changing his face. Me, I didn't say anything. It wasn't my place to argue him out of a decision that was his to make. Carol made him a sandwich and filled a jug with water without being asked. She handed it to him at the door. Frank walked him out to the truck, the store-box truck, still sitting in the yard from the day Randy first drove in it. And the two of them stood there for a minute, not saying much. I don't know what passed between them, if anything did. Randy climbed into the truck, started the engine, and pulled it out toward the lane. He didn't look back at the house before he went, or if he did, I didn't see it from where I stood. We watched the truck go for a length of that gravel lane and turned out onto the country road, dust hanging in the air behind it a long time after the sound of the engine had faded out completely. By mid-morning, the three of us who were left had gone back to whatever needed doing. I worked through the afternoon, mostly alone. Back before all this started, the worst thing a loose fence post could cost a man was a few strayed cattle and an afternoon's aggravation. I thought about Tom's arm, and Carol's bruised wrist, and Randy's heroism. I thought about a truck disappearing down a gravel lane and not coming back. Once, late in the day, I looked up from the post I was setting and out toward the county road. There was nothing to see out there, just the lane and the fence line running along it, and beyond that, more open country than any of us had any real way of knowing about anymore. I went back to the post. There was more fence to set before dark, and setting it was the only thing I had left that day that I knew for certain I could do right.